Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Debate Week on AETN continues this hour with the race for Congress in Arkansas's 3rd District. In alphabetical order tonight, the nominees are Michael Kalagias, the Libertarian Party candidate, Josh Mahoney, the Democratic Party nominee, and the Republican incumbent, Representative Steve Womack. The candidates will be questioned tonight by a panel of Arkansas journalists: John Lovett of the Southwest Times-Record, Doug Thompson of the Northwest Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and Una Lee of KHBS-KHOG. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 2 minutes to respond to a question, while rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Once again, the order of opening statements, questioning, rebuttals, closing statements, all determined prior to the broadcast by a drawing in which the candidates or their representative participated. Our timekeeper this hour is Anita Grote of AETN. And with that, our first opening statement tonight, Mr. Kalagias.
Thank you. I'm Michael Kalagias, and I'm your Libertarian candidate for Congress. I'm a United States Navy veteran. I served for 5 years. I deployed to the Persian Gulf twice. I'm also a retired school teacher, and I served on the board of directors for a public utility. I'm currently a volunteer firefighter, and I volunteer serving for numerous local charities. I'm running for office because we deserve better. Right now, Congress has about a 10% approval rating, and it's been that way for a while. We have about $21 trillion in national debt, and that goes up every year, about $1 trillion a year. Our current congressman has been in office for almost 8 years. He's added almost $8 trillion to our national debt. We haven't had a balanced budget since 1957. The interest alone on that debt is currently about 10% of our discretionary budget. Over the next 20 years, that'll rise to nearly 50%. At the same time, Medicare and Social Security are going bankrupt. There isn't going to be enough money to pay for things like defense, or infrastructure, or healthcare, or education, or any of those things that we debate about in election years. These are not new problems. We've known about them for decades. The Republicans haven't done anything to fix it. The Democrats haven't done anything to fix it. It hasn't mattered which party has been in power. The result has been the same: bad government. We need to do something different. We have saddled our next generation with an unbearable burden of debt. It's like we've declared war on our very own children. We need to do something different. We need to vote differently. Do not vote for another Republican or a Democrat that's been corrupted by large corporate donors or by special interests. Do not vote for the lesser of two evils, or even worse, stay home and not vote at all. You have a better choice. I'm a better choice. Vote Libertarian for change.
Thank you, sir. Second opening statement tonight, Mr. Womack.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin first by thanking AETN and the panel of journalists that are here tonight for hosting these debates. I think it's a great constructive forum whereby we can understand the issues that face the discerning electorate out there. In 2010, I left the office of Mayor of Rogers to run for Congress, and I made a commitment at that time that I was going to be a representative. I was going to go to Washington and represent the values espoused by the majority of citizens that call themselves home in the 3rd District of Arkansas. I believe I've done that. I've made that commitment in 2010. I reasserted that commitment in 2012, 14, and 16, where I successfully won re-election. And here I am again tonight, standing before the voters of Arkansas and asking for your vote and support for another term, for a 5th term in the United States Congress. My background speaks for itself. You know, I was a small businessman. I am a husband, a father, and a grandfather. I have served my country honorably in the United States Armed Forces with over 30 years of service. I've gone to Congress and I've been seated on a very powerful committee, the Appropriations Committee, and I've been elected chairman of the House Budget Committee. So I think that my peers in Congress believe in my talent and my leadership ability to create solutions that will put America on a different glide path. I'm going to agree with my opponents tonight on a number of issues, but there will be stark differences between the three of us as to what those right solutions should be. So tonight I'm asking again for your vote and your support as we seek a 5th term in the United States House of Representatives where we can continue to do the people's work for a better America. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And the moderator apologizes to Mr. Mahoney for getting him out of order. You should, sir, have had the second opening statement, but we'll go ahead and take you now.
I think I can make it work.
My apologies.
That's
my
okay.
error.
Thank you. Yes, I am Josh Mahoney. I'm the Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress in Arkansas's 3rd Congressional District. I want to thank AETN and our moderators and the candidates and everyone that's here and the people at home for taking part in this debate and making it happen. I'm thrilled that the state and our district gets to be a part of this process. I'm running for Congress in Arkansas's 3rd Congressional District because I want to represent Arkansans and Arkansas values in Washington, D.C. The 3rd District is a very interesting place. We have a Fortune 1 company in our backyard. We've got people that have moved there from all over the world, but we're still uniquely rural Arkansas, and we have our unique Arkansas values that come with that. And I think that we deserve to have leadership that will build us into one of the most dynamic districts in the United States. And there's a few ways I want to do that. Number one for me is making sure that we have good paying jobs. I've been part of a natural resource company for most of my life, and I want to use my knowledge of the energy industry, combine that with the boom in sustainable energy, and bring those jobs to the 3rd District, because I think the natural state is a natural place to be a leader in sustainability jobs all across the nation. Number two for me is healthcare. I believe that healthcare is a right. Unlike my opponent, Congressman Womack, who has voted countless times to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no alternative in place, I want to fight to make sure that we have protections for pre-existing conditions and make sure that people always have access to essential health care benefits. And finally, I'm going to fight to protect Social Security and Medicare because our seniors have worked hard to pay into those programs. And the corporate tax cut that was just passed has been written to Congressman Womack's budget to be paid for on the backs of our seniors and cuts to those programs. And I'm running not to let that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John Lovett has the first question tonight, and it goes first to Mr. Mahoney.
Yeah, what is a realistic solution to getting us back to a balanced budget, one that can be passed in both the Senate and the House?
Well, with a balanced budget, the first thing we've got to do is look at how we're taxing the country. We just passed a 20% corporate tax cut that Congressman Womack was a part of before he decided that the deficit was an issue as chairman of the House Budget Committee. And we do not need to put this on the backs of hardworking Americans, particularly our seniors, by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicare. We can be thoughtful about how we do these things to come up with a balanced budget that works for everybody and does not unfairly benefit the wealthy or unfairly penalize hardworking Arkansans who have worked their whole lives to pay into a program like Social Security or Medicare.
Mr. Willing, 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, the only person on this platform today that's advocated for any solutions that would get to the essence of your question, John, and that is, what can we do to get back to some kind of a balanced budget? The budget for a brighter American future that I championed in the House Budget Committee and got through the House Budget Committee, and of course that's where it stops right now, does exactly that. It takes us to achievable balance in year 9 of this plan. So prior to 2028, we do achieve balance. But it's important for people to understand the facts, the truth as it is about the federal budget. About 70% of our federal budget is on mandatory spending autopilot, going unchecked year over year. It grows exponentially throughout the 10-year budget window. Only about 30% of federal spending is what we call discretionary, and that's the spending that most people are familiar with their government. That's national parks and national defense, and that's cancer research and education, those kinds of programs. The problem is those programs are getting squeezed every year That's what the appropriators face every year, the squeezing of those discretionary dollars, because we haven't got a solution for the mandatory spending. Now, the fact is this, as my opponent has asserted that I want to cut those programs, I don't want to cut those programs. If I wanted to cut those programs, I would do absolutely nothing because they get cut on their own. In 2026, the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund goes broke. In 2033, 2034, Social Security goes broke, not enough money to pay the benefits. So you have to address the entitlement programs facing this country that continue to grow exponentially without any congressional input whatsoever. If you don't control that form of spending, there's no hope that you'll ever get to achievable balance.
Well, you can't do that when you explode the
excuse
deficit.
me, Mr. Mahoney, I have to interrupt and say the rules. I have to go now to Mr. Palacios. You'll get a rebuttal.
We've been hearing for the last 3 decades that we'll balance the budget in 10 years. We'll do this, and in 10 years it'll balance. And it's never happened, and it's not going to happen. Trying to think that something will happen later to kind of help us out, it hasn't worked. We need to do something now. We need to fix something now. There are very few budget hawks that are left in Congress. The good news is that you don't have to have a majority. So right now you get a majority Democrat Congress or you get a majority Republican Congress, and each one tries to work its hardest to meet its party's goals and then yells when they're not in the majority and they can't do that. What we need to do is get it to where there is no party in power. If we can make it to where there is no party that has a majority, then the people get to be in power again. Then instead of arguing over whether we pursue Democratic priorities or Republican priorities, we can start pursuing American priorities that are good for the people. We can start leaving out a lot of the special interest spending that goes on that makes up a huge portion of our budget. Even that's on autopilot, as the congressman has mentioned. A lot of that is going to government contractors that have had written into the law something that benefits just them. So we see it on every aspect. We see it in defense, we see it in infrastructure, we see it in healthcare. It's all written to benefit certain companies that make out like bandits at the expense of the rest of us. As someone who's going in independent from those 2 major parties, I wouldn't be influenced by any of them. As someone who's coming from a party that doesn't have huge corporate donors that are sponsoring them, or lobbyists that keep trying to get them to do their thing, I would have the freedom to do the right thing. And I think that there's just enough deficit hawks that are in Congress that we can work to actually cut spending, because if we can't cut spending, nothing else will work. Working people are already paying 50 to 60% of their income in taxes. We can't tax anymore. We need to cut spending.
Now, Mr. Mahoney, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you, Steve. You know, this is part of a long-established Republican plan that we're seeing enacted for the first time in quite a while. It's explode the deficit with the tax cut that gave a 20% tax cut to corporations. It's going to add $1.5 trillion deficit. And then we see the person that's in charge of the budget, which in your case is you, Congressman Womack, say, oh my gosh, we've got to cut entitlements. First off, I don't believe those are entitlements. Those are earned benefits that our seniors have worked and paid into their entire lives. They deserve to have those programs there, and we can fight to have a moral document that has our budget that makes sure that Medicare and Social Security are protected and respects to the middle class. Those are our job creators. When they have more money in their pockets, they buy more goods and services, they start small businesses. We don't have to give tax cuts to major corporations that don't need them.
Well, thank you. Our next question, Mr. Thompson, first for Mr. Womack.
Congressman, Ines Caceres entered the United States legally a quarter century ago. He lives in Springdale. He's lived there legally under the temporary protection status since that time. Next year, he doesn't know if he's still going to be allowed to remain here. He faces possible deportation. At the same time, many of your other constituents are frustrated at what they see as a Congress that can't make up its mind on what immigration policy should be, and at the same time, we now have children being kept in tents. What are the chances, what can be done to get a coherent immigration policy out of Washington?
Well, it's a great question, Doug, and it's one that's eluded Congress for a long, long time. I was dealing with immigration issues when I was the mayor of Rogers, so I'm very familiar, intimately familiar with the consequences of a failed immigration system in our country. I thought we had the right plan. Bob Goodlatte, chairman of Judiciary, brought forth a plan. It was far too conservative to ask our friends on the other side of the aisle to support it, but it addressed those 4 pillars that President Trump talked about in his State of the Union address. Things like chain migration, border security, relief for DACA, ending the visa lottery system. We had a plan put together that would address those issues. And when it failed to get the required number of votes in the House, our leadership sent those lawmakers back to the table again with the people on the moderate side of the equation to hammer out an agreement between where can we actually go in addressing these 4 pillars and come up with a system that could get bipartisan support. Well, we knew 2 things, Doug. We knew, number 1, that Republicans were standing for border security. But we needed to marry border security with some other issue that would be important to the other side of the aisle and important to members on my side of the aisle as well, and that's relief of the DACA program. And so we thought that we had the right marriage between 2 key issues in this immigration debate that would serve as a catalyst to be able to get this through. We take that to the House floor. Now, understand, we had hardcore, ultra-conservative Republicans and very moderate Republicans working together on the same issue. We put that to a vote on the floor, and how did our Democrat friends vote? They voted present. They voted present because they don't want their name associated with voting against relief for DACA. So in order to kill a bill that the Republicans had offered that should have had bipartisan support, they voted present. That's the kind of partisan politics that has to end if we're to solve an issue as big as this one.
Mr. Womack, thank you. Kick it over now to Mr. Kaligius.
Yeah, I think once again we're seeing, as Congressman Womack has just explained, that we have partisan gridlock in Washington, D.C. The Democrats will not support anything that's put forth by the Republicans. The Republicans won't support anything that's put forth by the Democrats. And it's not really mattering a whole lot what's actually being put forth or what the detriment of not passing something is. Our immigration system is broke. I think everybody can agree on that one. My grandparents on my dad's side were immigrants to this country. My grandfather really wanted to be an American, and he was able to live that American dream. He was able to come here. He was able to get a green card. He was able to take a citizenship test and become an American citizen. And so I've become part of that American dream. I'm living that dream. And that opportunity doesn't exist for most people anymore. The wait now for a green card can be 20 to 30 years. Most of our immigrants aren't sneaking across the border somehow trying to get here. They're coming through on legal visas. They are legally entering this country. And while they're waiting, their visas are expiring because they cannot get a green card because there's a 20 or 30-year wait to get that green card to try and become a citizen. They are being denied that American dream that the Statue of Liberty represents. We need to fix that. What we have now is we're fighting over symptoms of a completely broken immigration system. So I want to fix the system. Then we don't have to worry so much about the system, about the symptoms. So, and in order to do that, we're going to have to break that partisan gridlock. And in order to do that, we're going to have more than 2 parties at the table. If you still have just Republicans and you still have Democrats, the Republicans are still going to do what's good for the Republicans. The Democrats are still going to do what's good for the Democrats. And that's never what's good for the rest of the country. We need to stop that partisanship. To do that, we need to vote for someone different.
Now to Mr. Mahoney, 2 minutes, sir.
Yes, you know, I am disgusted with the lack of progress around immigration reform in this country. Some of the worst things I've ever seen this year to come out of the history of our federal government when we put children in cages at the border from people that were coming simply to cross the border or to claim asylum. Now, I support a pathway to citizenship for DACA. I also support a pathway for citizenship for people with TPS. And if people don't know what DACA is, it's people that came here as children. They were brought across the border when they were very young, and they've lived their whole lives in this country, and this is the only home they've known. TPS is temporary protected status. It's people that came here because they were fleeing potentially a war conflict or civil war in a lot of instances. I have my own friend of mine that's been here for 20 years that works in a shipping facility nearby, and he has children that are adolescents that ask every day, what's going to happen if they come get you? Who's going to take care of me? His kids are citizens. So they're living this trauma too. And we have these people who are American in their hearts, and they deserve to have the opportunity to become an American citizen. And I gotta say, you know, Congressman Womack referred to his time as mayor. When Congressman Womack was mayor, there were some issues around immigration I don't think that were very good. And they did not reflect well on your campaign, sir. If I remember correctly, Newsweek wrote an article about it because they were suggesting the police were profiling our immigrant community. And, you know, I think that in a district like the 3rd, where we have become a new face of immigration, where people have come there to build our businesses, we should be a leader on immigration reform, not somebody that's standing by the wayside and letting things just happen as they do.
Mr. Womack, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, first of all, I'm vaguely familiar with the article that my opponent on the left, tonight on the right, but functionally on the left on these issues, refers to. But I had a police officer back in the early part of my administration as a mayor who nearly lost his life because an illegal immigrant secured his weapon, fired a shot that severed his femoral artery. And it was then that I knew that this whole immigration phenomenon had come home to Northwest Arkansas, that an illegal immigrant was capable of potentially taking the life of a law enforcement officer. So that caused me to believe that we have to have a better immigration policy, and to do that, we first need to secure the border and then look at the other internal functions of our immigration policy that are broken. But unless and until you secure that border, you're never going to have a meaningful immigration system, because it will just continue to proliferate across the country. So that's my background on it, and we will continue to work toward it.
Ms. Lee has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Kalagias.
Mr. Kalagias, the Department of Veterans Affairs continues to struggle with poor performance and scandals. Most recently, the Veterans Affairs struggling to pay student veterans the housing allowances under the GI Bill, the VA canceling thousands of diagnostic tests, and closer to home, the pathologist found to be impaired at the VA Medical Center in Fayetteville. You know a little bit about that. So if elected, what will you do to help veterans?
I do know a little bit about that. I'm one of there are almost 20,000 people who are impacted by that impaired pathologist that may have misdiagnosed up to 30,000 different cases for 20,000 vets. And I'm one of those vets that may have been misdiagnosed, and I'm still waiting to find out whether or not I was misdiagnosed years ago. Our Veterans Affairs Department has not been very well run. And in recent years, they've tried throwing some more money at the problem, but it hasn't really fixed anything. We've seen some administrators that get a lot happier, but it hasn't really done much for our veterans. That's something that I think we need to look at hard. We are sending our troops out to places where they have no business being, where they're not going to accomplish anything more meaningful. We're having Americans that are shedding blood for other countries' civil wars. And then when they come home, we're not giving them the benefits that they were promised. We're turning our backs on those people that are fighting for us. So, and that needs to change. And I haven't seen any sign of change coming from Congress on that. I haven't seen any sign of change on fixing their student payments. I haven't seen any change coming from out of the VA hospitals. They implement new programs that have lots and lots of administrative things that go with it, which makes it almost impossible for the veterans to use. Congress just recently passed, and Mr. Womack here also voted for a bill that's now sitting in the Senate that would deny veterans the chance to even sue or have their day in court if they are mistreated by the VA. So these are things that need to change. Congress has not done a very good job of it, and I would do a much better job of it, because like I said, these are very close to me. It affects me personally, and I feel for everyone else that's been affected even worse than I have.
Go now to Mr. Mahoney, same question, 2 minutes.
Well, you know, I think the first thing we do is we don't cut $57 billion in veteran spending like is in Congressman Womack's budget that he's proposed. You know, we've got a lot of issues in the VA where we're happy to send people off to multiple deployments, and we act surprised that these individuals have trauma when they come home, but we don't take the time to take care of them. They've sworn an oath to protect our country, but that oath works both ways. And we have to protect our veterans when they come home too. And so part of that is being due diligent about the administration policies and who we have placed in the VA, but we also can't just spend money on the military side of things without also spending money on taking care of our veterans when they come home. I firmly believe in that, and I'm very frustrated by it. One of the things that I've always been very curious about is developing a residency program with a lot of our nurses and doctors that are coming out of school. If they would spend 5 years in the VA, we'd work on some loan forgiveness with them, so we have a continuity of quality care for everyone that's coming through our Veterans Association. And by the way, I want to bring us back to the previous question while I've got a minute here. My opponent just branded an entire group of people as criminals that helped build a lot of the corporations in Northwest Arkansas. They make up almost 20% of our community. Most of them are American citizens at this point, but all of them are good people. And that study that was done in that Newsweek article actually found out that the community with the lowest crime rate was the Latino community. So I have to question why he chooses to characterize them like that. As someone else who has long supported law enforcement, I understand the dangers of that job every day. My best friend I've known since I was 7 years old, who was the best man in my wedding, who I've done many hours of helping him train other police, has also incurred some pretty difficult situations in his life. He also married a woman from El Salvador who came here from another country.
Got to call time, Mr. Mahoney. Mr. Womack, to you.
Thank
2
you.
minutes.
Well, you know, Michael said a minute ago that you can't just solve the VA problems by throwing a lot more money at it. We have thrown billions of dollars at the Veterans Administration. And frankly, part of the problem with the VA, in my strong opinion, and I've had this conversation with the former Secretary David Shulkin when we brought him to Northwest Arkansas to tour the VA facility in Fayetteville, is that the VA has gotten away from some of its core mission, core competencies. Building hospitals is not a core competency of the VA. Doing information technology work, i.e. database management, those kinds of things, not a core competency with the VA. And former Secretary Shulkin and I agreed that those are some of the things that we needed to be outsourcing from the VA so that we can channel the VA resources that are precious into the programs that actually go right to the heart of treating and caring for our veterans. And that, of course, ended up becoming part of the CHOICE Act, where because of the backlogs on a whole lot of cases around the country, and you know where they were, having trouble getting proper treatment in a timely way, we created a VA choice program where we could, after a certain period of time, these veterans could take their care to a private physician, to the market, so to speak. The problem is it has been underfunded. It hasn't enjoyed the amount of funding to give it long-term sustainability, so we will always continue to fight for more money to give our veterans that opportunity to seek care elsewhere than the VA treatment facility. And Michael, I sure pray fervently that the misdiagnosis, that no misdiagnosis happened with your particular case, because what happened with that pathologist in Fayetteville was a very regrettable, very expensive, both in terms of resources and in terms of lives, cost in our country. We will continue to dedicate ourselves to providing the necessary care and support for our veterans.
All right, thanks. Mr. Kaligias, 1 minute.
Okay, and I'd like to keep it on the question and not rebut the previous question. One of the problems that we have with this pathologist is that he was overworked, and some of that stress may have led to some of his impairment. One of the things we're going to need to do is get more doctors, and unfortunately that's not just a VA problem, that's a problem that's nationwide. We're about 1 million doctors short of where we need to be. We're going to have to fix our education system in order to do that. Another thing I think we could do with the VA is put it back in the Department of Defense. So we're losing a lot of efficiency, and we're making a lot of mistakes by transferring those people when they get out of the Department of Defense, when they leave that service and they go into the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's a completely different department, and they have no idea what's going on. And the people that were there, the community that they had in the military is gone. It's a new community, and they get lost. And one thing I'd like to ask the congressman would be if he, in order to get a good understanding of the situation, would drop his Cadillac plan that he gets as a congressman and get the same VA care that Congress has inflicted on the rest of us veterans.
Well, you'll have to answer it in a subsequent moment if you can. The next question is from Mr. Mr. Thompson. It goes first to Mr. Mahoney.
Mr. Mahoney, one big growing item, whether we're paying for it or not, in the federal budget and out of the pockets of private citizens. It doesn't matter if you're building a higher seawall or if it's in Arkansas dealing with more adverse weather or whatever, or more insect damage or whatever. I don't think there's very many people left who dispute that climate change is real. If I'm wrong in that, my apologies, and please give you, whichever other candidate, give a chance to answer on that, but rebut me on that. But yeah, what now? I mean, essentially, the scientific community is telling us it's too late for prevention, that now we are now looking at cure, if that's even possible.
Absolutely. We need to trust and believe our scientists that are doing this work. When 99% of scientists agree that climate change is real, and I think we see it every year with our changing weather patterns, we need to accept that. And there's a couple of things we need to do. And number one is we need to make sure the EPA is actually staffed with scientists that understand the environmental impact, but also the economic impact of climate change. Number two, the military has been very, very frank about the national security threat that climate change is causing. Because not only is it a threat to our bases and our ports around the world, but when you have a destabilized region, and then there's a potential for a drought there and food shortage, you're going to have even further destabilized region. And just bringing that back home here to Arkansas, we grow a lot of crops here that feed the world, but on the other side, we're the duck hunting capital of the world too. When the weather changes, the ducks don't come south anymore. That affects our tourism. It affects the people that come into the state, and it affects our business and the things that we export. And as we go further down this road, with climate change, the droughts and the hurricanes and what have you, food shortages, whether or not it's visible to us right now, are going to happen. And it's a very scary thought to see what that might be like. So we need to address it as soon as we can.
Mr. Womack, 2 minutes.
Well, I'm not real sure that there is a robust debate about whether the climate changes. Climate change has happened forever, and there's no need for a history lesson on it. I think the real argument, the real debate that rages today is just how much, if any, man contributes to that particular climate change. And we can talk statistics all day long. I read an article this week that said there were fewer tornadoes this year than in recent years. And gosh, a few years ago, there were so many tornadoes that all of a sudden it was because of climate change that this was happening, and it was going to be with us forever. And that just didn't pan out to be true. Look, I believe this. We have an obligation as a society to protect what the good Lord has given us in terms of resources. And it's up to us to make sure that we are good stewards of those resources. At the same time, I think it's important that we carefully balance between economic activity, the productivity of the American economy, and its relationship to things that seem to go on the dartboard of the climate change person, and that is primarily oil or petroleum-related products. And I'm a believer that we should be doing everything we can to have a sustainable fuel, power, energy mix that can be renewable in nature. But at the end of the day, I'm hesitant to make the federal government the market maker in that process by a lot more government regulation and red tape. So trying to find the sweet spot between responsible energy policy and its impact on the economy and the return on investment back to the climate, I think, is what we continue to try to seek.
Yes, Mr. Clay, just 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think it can't really be settled science in that there's too many variables. As a former science teacher, one of the things that you have to do before you can say something is in fact true is you have to be able to eliminate all of your variables so that you're just testing one variable to see if that's in fact the case. And with climate change and whether you've got too many variables. to be able to say with scientific certainty that something is happening or is not. Now, I think the majority of scientists believe, they have a pretty good theory that our climate is changing, and I agree with that. Our climate probably is changing. How much of that is man-made and how much of that is natural, I can't determine. And in the end, as you pointed out in the question, it's not really relevant anymore because there really isn't a whole lot that we can do about it. Without regulations, without being in some of these treaties that we've had, the United States has still dropped its carbon dioxide production. So we are becoming a greener country without needing any outside interference with our country as far as the environment goes. But that doesn't change anything as far as our climate change goes, and it's not going to affect what happens in Asia, where we're getting a great increase in the amount of pollutants that are dumped into our environment. So from the United States standpoint, there's not much more that we could be doing differently than what we already are doing to try and keep our climate healthy. The only thing we can do is kind of do what we can on our end, hope someone else does what they do on their end, and depend on the business sector to come up with technology and with answers that'll help us not necessarily defeat the problem, but adapt and deal with the problem.
Mr. Mahoney, 1 minute.
Yeah, you know, we absolutely have to invest in sustainability. So in that part, I agree with both my opponents. But, you know, when we talk about sustainability, too, we've got to remember there's 3 parts to it. The first part is planet, the third part is people, or excuse me, the second part is people, and the third part is profit. If it doesn't profit, it's not sustainable. Our #1 corporation that's in our backyard has an impressive sustainability policy. A lot of our natural resource companies have been charging themselves an internal carbon tax because they know that they have to make the move to sustainability. And while Scott Pruitt was in office, cutting all these advantages that the solar industry had, and tariffs were being put on solar cells, my opponent, Congressman Womack, didn't say a thing about it. And we have to step up. Let's bring those jobs in. Let's update our infrastructure to an electric-based infrastructure. Let's have those jobs, and let's do the right thing at the same time while we're making money and protect our planet.
New question now from Ms. Yee, and it goes first to Mr. Womack.
All right, well, Congressman, it's the job of the Senate, but would you have confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court if given the opportunity? And if the allegations of sexual assault or of lying under oath against Brett Kavanaugh is proven, then do you support impeachment?
You're right. The House has nothing to do with the appointment or the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice. But direct to your question, were I sitting in the place of Tom Cotton or John Boozman, our United States senators, I would have clearly voted the same way, yes, to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the highest court in the land. It remains to be seen, and I don't know what process there would be to change that particular outcome, but you ask hypothetically, if something were to come about that would be conclusive evidence that the situation happened as pursuant to the testimony of Dr. Ford, or that it was without any ability to rebut that he lied, in fact, to the Senate, lied to the American people, then we just have to take that as it comes. That process would begin, of course, in the House of Representatives, but we're dealing with a lot of hypotheticals right now. As we speak, Brett Kavanaugh is the 9th and most recent addition to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. The calendar is full, it is underway, and I expect that he's going to give his service to and for a long period of time to the bench in support of Supreme Court matters for at least a generation. So the short answer to your question is, of course, I would have confirmed Judge Kavanaugh based on what I was able to see and read.
Mr. Kalages.
I would not have voted to confirm Judge Kavanaugh, and it wasn't because of the statements that Dr. Ford had made, but because of his record on the Fourth Amendment. I would like to see Supreme Court justices that have more respect for our rights that were so hardly fought for, that were put into that Constitution, that were put into that Bill of Rights 2 centuries ago. So, but in the interest of easier government, I guess, we've kind of ignored a lot of those rights. We've put aside our First Amendment rights. We've put aside our Second Amendment rights. In Mr. Kavanaugh's case, he's put aside our Fourth Amendment rights. I would have voted against him just for that reason. So with Dr. Ford's testimony, how do you condemn a man on uncorroborated testimony? The testimony came late, so it's hard for me to say let's get rid of this guy just because somebody made an accusation. And the timing of the accusation was suspect because it gets back again to Democrats against Republicans. When President Obama nominated Garland, he nominated a justice whose record is almost indistinguishable from Judge Kavanaugh's record. They voted exactly together on the same court on almost every single decision they ever made. There's almost no difference between them, and there's almost no difference between them and Judge Kennedy, who they're replacing. So, but because one was appointed by, or attempted to be appointed by a Democratic president, the Republicans refused to even give him a hearing. In this case, we have one now. Our most recent one was appointed by a Republican president, and so they did everything they could to try and prevent him from getting his hearing in this election cycle or from getting a seat on the bench. So I'd like to see that partisanship go away so that we can get actual real debate on real substance instead of my team versus your team. As a member of the House, if I'm elected, I would say that if we do find corroborating evidence for Dr. Ford's testimony, then I would seek to impeach the justice.
To Mr. Mahoney, 2 minutes, sir.
Yeah, well, let's be very clear about the process here. We're not talking about investigation. We're talking about a job interview. And y'all, I expect my nominees to the Supreme Court, regardless of where they lean politically, to be impeccable. And if there is consideration or suspicion that he has committed sexual assault in a manner that was brought forth credibly, I think that's enough reason not to confirm him. I want somebody on the Supreme Court who is better than all of us, and we've had a good record of that for a long time, and I do not feel like that Dr. Ford's allegations were not credible. And let's keep in mind too, they had a week to do a very brief investigation, but this is a job interview. There is no job interview where I've been able to go to, and if somebody came in and made allegations against me, I probably would not get hired. And you have to think about that. This is someone applying for a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the world. And second to that, this was not an allegation that came out late. She actually reached out in early July when the list of all potential appointees came out. Now, her name was not initially attached to her report when she said that she believed she had suffered sexual assault at the hands of Judge Kavanaugh, but she did reach out that early on. So to call this a timely partisan attack, I feel is wrong. The thing is, we need to give her response the due diligence it deserved in regard to appointing someone to the highest court in the land. And so, if there comes out corroborating evidence that supports her claims and her accusations, then absolutely I'm going to vote to impeach him. And I want to hear what Congressman Womack has to say about that, because he didn't answer the hypothetical.
Well, Mr. Womack, you have 1 minute for rebuttal.
I don't really deal in a lot of hypotheticals. I have a lot of real-time issues that I have to deal with on a daily basis
yes or no, sir?
that consume a lot of my time. And I'm not yielding to the gentleman over here on my right, even though he'd like to take some of my time. Look, the presumption of innocence is a cornerstone, of our system, of our constitutional system that protects the rights of people. And without corroborating evidence, and look, this guy has been vetted a number of times by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and subjected to another week-long investigation after the allegations made by Dr. Ford were exposed in the Senate Judiciary hearing. So because of the presumption of innocence and the lack of corroborating evidence, I don't think that my Republican colleagues down at the other end of the Capitol had any other way to vote but yes to confirm Justice Kavanaugh.
Next question from Mr. Lovett. It goes first to Mr. Collages.
Well, this is more of a Fort Smith-centric question, but it does relate to the rest of the district and really the rest of the country. I-49 is a major deal, completion of I-49. And living in an era where there's no you can't do earmarks, what can you do to ensure that that segment's going to be completed?
Well, there's this is one of those things where no libertarian likes a tax, but we're okay with use fees. If you're going to use a service, then we're fine with you paying for using that service. And so we pay to use the roads. We have gasoline taxes that we pay for every mile we're going, we're burning gas, we're paying taxes. So, and we should have enough funding there to be able to pay to complete these roads. And if we were not spending it so much on corporate welfare, on pet projects, on inflated costs for everything that we do, we could afford to build that interstate and have money left over and decrease that gasoline tax. So what I would like to see is get some of the corruption out of it, and then we can use the gas tax money that we do have to finish the roads that we need to finish. We also need to have a highway department. We need to have on the state level, and help from the federal government that is proactive. I lived for a while in Bella Vista, which is the very northern part of the district. So I was there before they built our little section of I-49 between Fort Smith and Northwest Arkansas. And they'd been talking about a Bella Vista bypass for decades before I'd gotten there. And they haven't built it yet. Missouri was ready to build it 30 years ago. And they had the money for it 20 years ago. And they kept waiting for Arkansas to get their act together to figure out where to build it. And Arkansas never did, so Missouri built their part. They had the money for it. When Arkansas finally came up with their idea where they wanted to build it, it didn't match up with anywhere with Missouri's build at all. So now we've got to come up with even more money to try and make them match. So we need a federal government that gets the states on the same page so that we don't have to keep rebuilding things to make them work. And we need states that are proactive, that know that we need to build stuff now to be ready for things, so that we're not retroactively trying to fix a problem that costs 10 times more to fix than it would have been to do it right in the first place.
To Mr. Mahoney, 2 minutes.
You know, we have about 1,000 people that move into Northwest Arkansas every day. And I know some of those people go up and down 49. And being in the heartland of the country, it makes so much sense to make sure that our infrastructure going through Fort Smith is completed, because we can manufacture there and ship all over the world, or excuse me, all over the country, I should say. And so having someone, in this case, I want me to be that guy to get ahead of this issue and say that to get everybody on the same page and to go out and fight to make sure that we get it funded appropriately, that we're not giving taxes to corporations that don't need them, but to be a leader amongst the cities and the counties, the road department, the Department of Transportation, and any type of federal grants that we can get to make this happen. It could be tremendous as Northwest Arkansas and the 3rd District continue every day to just explode. And the thing about it, you know, in the 3rd District, with so many people moving into the area, we're already making our infrastructure creak. And so we've got a great argument to go forward and say we need to invest in an infrastructure project across the country, but particularly right here in the 3rd, because it's going to make a difference for a lot of people, and it's going to make a significant economic impact. And so I would like to see those things happen. I would like to see our factories in Fort Smith get busy again, and I'd like to see them put those roads to good use that we're going to build so we can deliver goods all over the country and have those jobs there in Fort Smith.
Mr. Womack, 2 minutes.
Well, just one correction to what my friend from Fayetteville said just a minute ago. He said 1,000 people a day are moving into Northwest Arkansas, and that's not exactly correct. It's roughly a month.
Pardon me. Thanks, sir.
That scares the daylights out of the Northwest Arkansas Council and people like me. Infrastructure is going to be the great barrier to Northwest Arkansas continuing to progress in the way that it has. And in what Michael said a minute ago, we struggle with how to fund the Highway Trust Fund, where a lot of these dollars come from. And nobody wants to pay higher taxes. Nobody wants Big Brother tracking your mileage that you're putting up. We don't have an answer for electrification of cars. So just how do we come up with a solution to adequately fund the Highway Trust Fund so that it can apportion out dollars for the critical infrastructure projects that we need? And in the 3rd District of Arkansas, they are very well known, completion of the Bella Vista bypass. By the way, part of it is done. Not all of Missouri segment is done, and we've reached agreement to be able to use some of our money up there. So that's hopefully in the plans. To the south, completing I-49 between the terminus at Alma down to Barling, and then how do you bridge over the Arkansas River? That's a $300 million plus project. In between those two, you have completion of the 412 bypass in and around Springdale, connecting back toward the turnpike going to Oklahoma, and then continuing on to the east along Highway 68 and 412 in northwest Arkansas. Those are very expensive, very critical infrastructure projects that none of these local communities, cities, counties, even our state, are going to be able to afford to do to be able to get them done in a timely fashion. But there is a return on investment if the federal government could step in and help us get some of these projects funded to completion.
Mr. Clay, just 1 minute rebuttal.
And again, I'd like to say that the money's there. There's no reason for some of these projects to be costing this much money. And we need to stop wasting the spending that we're doing in our highway departments. We don't need to be spending transportation dollars on building new hangars for executive airports. We don't need to be spending so much money per mile on paving our roads, on building our interstates. The cost is 10 times higher than it needs to be because of the burdensome regulations that come with it and because of the special favors that have been written into the laws for certain companies that provide certain items for every highway that needs to get built. So if we can get rid of that corruption, if we can get rid of that corporate welfare that's built into the system, what we are collecting in our gas taxes right now, what we are collecting in vehicle registration fees right now is more than enough to meet all of our highway infrastructure needs.
The time for a question and answer segment of our broadcast tonight, of our debate tonight, has ended, and we would at this time extend our deepest appreciation to the lady and gentlemen of our panel. And per the drawing that was held immediately prior to our broadcast tonight, the order of introduction specifies, or order of closing arguments specifies that Mr. Womack go first. Congressman, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Steve. And again, thanks to our panelists and to AETN for hosting this debate tonight. I said in my opening that in 2010, I sought this office to go make a difference in Washington, to espouse the values that are reflected by the majority of citizens that I represent in Washington, and I want that opportunity to do that again. The contrast that you see tonight in this debate could not be more stark. The question for the discerning voter on November the 6th is, do you want to put somebody in Washington, D.C. who is going to be a reliable vote for the Pelosi left, to fight law and order, i.e. abolish ICE, to open the borders, to provide Medicare for all, to give away more government programs, to take more of your tax dollars, to strengthen and grow government? Or do you want a candidate who's going to go up and protect individual freedom, protect the unborn in the Second Amendment, and look after, provide oversight and stewardship for the tax dollars that you give Washington so that they are properly accounted for in the expense of running the government of the United States? The general election is a contest of ideas. It's America's contest of ideas. And those ideas have been presented here tonight, and as I said, with a very stark contrast between the candidates that are seeking your vote tonight. I believe the American idea is real, and I believe it endures. And I'd like an opportunity to go back to Washington, D.C. and continue to fight for these ideas so that we can keep America on the path to make it exceptional once again. And with your vote and your support, I'll have an opportunity to do that in January. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here tonight.
Mr. Womack, thank you, sir. Mr. Mahoney.
I want to thank the panelists, the moderator, and the candidates, and everyone that's here and watching for participating tonight. This has been a great experience, and I appreciate everybody for being a part of the process. You know, on the campaign trail, a few weeks ago in Yellville, I met a Trump supporter who is still very much a Trump supporter in many ways, but he came up to me because he was upset about our budget priorities. And he expressed to me the difficulties that they had trying to afford medical bills for his wife's cancer treatment that she ultimately died from. In 2018, in the wealthiest nation on earth, I find it morally wrong that people are denied basic, essential health care benefits simply because of how much money they make or don't make. Not in 2018 in the United States. That's why I do support Medicare for All. I believe that a public option that someone could buy into is a great idea. It works great for our seniors, and if we have more young people buying into those programs, it's actually going to make the program more solvent. But even more than that, I'm in this program to protect the hundreds of thousands of people in Arkansas with pre-existing conditions and the millions across this country who stand to lose their insurance if Congressman Womack had his way with trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I am not going to let that happen, and I'm going to fight to protect Social Security and Medicare from drastic budget cuts made to pay for corporate tax cuts. Thank you, and I appreciate your time, and with your support, we will finally have a congressman that is there to fight for the people and not the powerful.
Mr. Mahoney, closing statement. Excuse me, Mr. Kaligias.
Yeah, again, it doesn't really matter what we want to do about health care or what we want to do about infrastructure, these things that we've been debating about today, because there isn't going to be any money for it if we don't get the budget fixed. And that's where we need to concentrate on. Term limits right now in this country are very popular. Anytime they're proposed, they usually pass, but they're not necessary. In the case of the U.S. House of Representatives, we have a chance to institute term limits every 2 years. And I would urge those of you that support term limits to do it here too. You can go to the ballot box in November and you can vote for term limits by voting against the person who's been in Congress now for almost 8 years and put somebody new in the job, because the job we've been getting so far from our Congress hasn't been good. I'm not going to vote for any spending bill that isn't part of a balanced budget. I'm not going to do anything that's going to add money to a deficit. Okay, I'm going to only vote for things that get us a balanced budget, and now, not 10 years from now, hopefully. I'm going to work with the deficit hawks that are in Congress to be able to cut spending, cut it significantly, cut it responsibly. You have the chance to be the change that you want to see in the world. You can be part of history. Be libertarian with me. Vote for the honest guy for a change.
Mr. Kaligias, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the candidates for Congress in Arkansas's 3rd Congressional District. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And you are very cordially invited to join us tomorrow as Debate Week continues here on AETN. Good night.
Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.